All right, welcome back to day 3 of PowerShell. So the first 2 days we covered what is PowerShell, overview of PowerShell. We talked about variables and different operators. Day 2 we went over useful techniques, and then we talked about flow control, if-else statements, and switches. Today we're going to continue with flow control and mainly talking about different loops. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Again, before we go into loops, I want to go ahead and go over the quiz just real quick. So again, as I'm going over the questions, go ahead and pause after I read the question, make sure you know the answer, and then I'll go ahead and give you the answer. So question 1, list the 5 variable types we discussed day 1. So that would be bnash, boolean, number, array, string, hash table. Next question, booleans can either be what or what. That would be true or false. Next question, strings must have what characters wrapped around the text? And that would be quotation marks. The next question, items in the array are separated by what? Well, in an array, they would be separated by a comma. Next question, hash table store what 2 items? That'd be key value pairs. Next question, what does the append operator do? What if the variable types are an integer, array, and string? So the append operator just adds to the end of. If it's an integer, it adds it to the number. So for example, if I do my integer is 5 and I do plus equals 3, that would make it 8. If it's an array, it adds it to the end as an extra additional item. If it's a string, it concatenates it. So if I do strong is my original string and I do plus equals ER, that would be stronger. If I have 8 items in my array, what index number should I choose to get the 8th item? That would be index 7. Remember, index 0 is the first item. What would the length operator return on the above array? It would return 8 because there are 8 items in that array. How do I add variable A to a text file? So for that one, if I want to add it to the text file, I would do $A and double right angle bracket, so 2 greater than signs, and then with the name of the text file. How do I override the text file with only variable A? That would just be a single right angle bracket. So I'd do $A, 1 right angle bracket, and then the text file name. What flow control evaluates one conditional statement one time? That would be an if statement. What flow control evaluates multiple conditional statements only one time? And that would be your switch statement. All right, now let's go ahead and get into loops. So in computer science, a loop is a programming structure that repeats a sequence of instructions until a specific condition is met. So again, you're going to run into loops a lot. Anytime you program, you're going to be doing loops because there's a lot of times whenever you need to do something a certain amount of times, or it needs to be repeated a certain amount of times. All right, so again, you're going to use loops to cycle through values, to add maybe sums of numbers, repeat different functions, do a lot of various things. The 2 most common types of loops are while loops and for loops, which we'll discuss. And then we're also going to discuss do while, do until, and for each loops. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. But before we actually talk about specifically about loops, it's important that we are aware of what an infinite loop is. So an infinite loop is when a loop, it gets cycled and it can never escape from that loop. And again, we'll talk about some of the reasons we get into infinite loops. But it's important if your script is running and running and running and it never stops, there are 2 methods you can do to stop that loop. The first method is to hit Control-C, and that should break out a loop and return to the command prompt. The next one is that stop button right here. All right, so you just press that little red button, and that should get you out of that infinite loop. Now first, let's go ahead and talk about a while loop. All right, so while loops, they check one condition over and over. While that condition is true, it continues to loop. It only escapes the loop when that condition becomes false. So first, you initialize your variable, just like anything else. So you're gonna, at the very top, you're going to have a variable. In this case, we're going to initialize our variable x, and we're going to set it equal to 8. Then we're going to go into the while loop, right? And we're going to say, while this variable x is less than 10, we're going to do stuff. So it's exactly like an if statement, except a loop will continue to test that conditional over and over and over, right? So we have x equals 8. Is x less than 10? Yes. If it's true, then we're going to go ahead and do something. We're going to say 8 is less than 10, and then we're going to add 1 to x, and then we're going to test it again. Now, x becomes 9. So now we're going to say, is 9 less than 10? Go through the loop. Is 9, and then if it's true, which it is, 9 is less than 10, come over here, we're going to say 9 is less than 10, and then we're going to add 1 to x, and it becomes 10. Is 10 less than 10? Nope. At that point, we're going to come over here, and then outside of the loop, we're going to say it's 10 or more. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the syntax of while loops. So again, you have your key components, right? You have the while keyword, you have your conditional statement, and then you have your code statements. Again, it's always important to remember that at some point in a while loop, you have to increment, decrement, or change the variable that is being evaluated in the conditional statement. All right, if you don't change this variable, then if it's true once, it's always going to be true, and you're going to end up getting an infinite loop. All right, so in this case, we have num is equal to 5. We're going to come in here, we're going to ask ourselves, is 5 not equal to 1? That would be a true statement. So then we're going to go ahead and go inside. We're going to say num is 5, num is not 1, and then we're going to re-evaluate this num. We're going to subtract 1 from it and store it back in a num. Now num becomes 4. Then a while loop will check the conditional statement again. But now num is 4. So does 4 not equal 1? That is true. So it'll say num is 4, num is not 1, and then we reduce it by 1 more. So now it's 3, and it continues to go until it becomes 1. Does 1 not equal 1? That is false. 1 equals 1. Therefore, it escapes the loop. All right, so this will not be an infinite loop because you are subtracting 1 from each time, and eventually it's going to get to false. All right, so while the conditional statement is true, it continues to loop. But once it becomes false, it exits the loop. Another important note, PowerShell does not care about spaces or indents. However, I would highly recommend using indentations to make sure that your code is easy to read and you can follow along. So for example, the way I always do it is I will have the keyword, right, up here, then I'll have my conditional statement, and then under the keyword, I'll have my opening and closing bracket. That way I know everything in here is part of this while statement. And then I indent everything inside of here, just like so. That way it's a lot easier for me to read, right, everything under here. And I know everything in here is indented. And once we get into like nested loops or nested if statements, you're going to also have another keyword like if, and then everything inside those curly brackets are going to be indented out to here. So again, it's important to make sure your indentation is nice so you can follow along. Because once you start getting like functions and then loops and then if statements, it's going to get really confusing if you don't use indentation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it. I want you to try to use a while loop, and I want to see if you can count to 10. And then after you pause it, I'll go ahead and show you how I would use a while loop to count to 10. All right, as always, I'm going to go ahead and start with my comment block at the top. And then before that, I'm going to go ahead and do my CLS. And then name, date, and title. We're going to talk about while loops. And then let's go ahead and do it. Now, my while loop is going to be counting from 1 to 10. So before we even get into the while loop, we need to initialize our variable, right? So because we're counting, I'm just going to call this the variable a counter. So I'm just going to say counter. I'm going to set it equal to 1 because I want to count from 1 to 10. So I want it to start at 1. And I know I have to use a while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and say while loop that counts from 1 to 10. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and Control J. I'm going to type in while. And then I have it right here. So I know my counter, my variable that's in the conditional is going to be my counter. And if I'm trying to count from 1 to 10, I want it while my counter is less than or equal to 10. All right, to do less than or equal to, you do LE 10. Now, while my counter is less than or equal to 10, what am I going to do? Well, first I just want to kind of display my counter, right? To display it, I can just go ahead and just, write out counter. And that should display whatever that is. Now, if I'm thinking, a lot of people will make mistakes and they'll just stop right there. They'll say, okay, counter is equal to 1 while counter is less than or equal to 10. Display my counter, and that should count from 1 to 10, right? So if I go ahead, let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. Now you'll notice, all right, this continues to run, right? So I'm stuck inside an infinite loop. And this is one of the reasons, right? We gotta be careful when we're doing loops to always think about what's happening, right? So I have counter is equal to 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes. Go inside, print out 1. Now come back up. Notice we never changed that variable that is inside that conditional loop. And if you never change it, guess what? Most likely you're going to get an infinite loop. So again, we displayed 1, which was good, but then we actually forgot to go ahead and actually change counter. So after we display counter, we want to increase it by 1. So in this case, we can just do plus plus. Now if we run it, there we go, perfect. We got 1 to 10, displayed it perfectly. All right, now I would like for you to go ahead and count from 1 to 100, but count by 2s. So go ahead and pause it, see if you can do it yourself, and then I'll go ahead and give you the answer here in a second. All right, so if we're going to count from 1 to 100 by 2s, let me go ahead and change this. All right, so we want a while loop that counts from 1 to 100, but by 2s. All right, so let's think about what we want. We still want our counter to be 1 because we're going to start at 1. However, we want it not to stop at 10, but stop at 100. So let's go ahead and change this to counter is less than or equal to 100. We want to display the number that we're on. However, we don't want to count by 1, so we don't want to do counter plus plus. we actually want to do counter plus equals 2, right? Which this is the same thing as counter equals counter plus 2. All right, so this should go from 1 to 100, but we're counting by 2s each time. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, very good. All right, so we got from 1, right, from 1 to 100. But of course, if we're starting with 1 and we're counting by 2s, you're just going to get to 99. So again, excellent, excellent job. All righty. So that's pretty much it for while loops. All right, here is an example of a while loop where you're starting with 1 and you're counting while x is less than 12. So it should count, again, from 1 to 11. So again, for our expected output, again, we got 1 all the way to 11, and then it escapes once it gets to 12 because 12 is not less than 12. Let's go into the next example. Here we have a while loop. Go ahead and pause the video. See if you can figure out what the expected output should be. All right, well, we know that we're starting with x equals 3. While 3 does not equal 1, we're going to print out. So we're going to continue to go. But what do you notice? We're starting with 3. All right, we're decreasing it. So we should say x is 3, x is not 1. Then decrease it to 2. X is 2, x is not 1. Then decrease it to 1. Does 1 not equal 1? That is false, so escape. So that's exactly, yep, exactly what we said. Here's another while loop, right, where our value is 4. It says while value does not equal 3. So what do you think here is the expected output? So if you guessed an infinite loop, you would be correct because you're starting with 4 and then you're saying 4 does not equal 3. So that is true, but then you're increasing it to 5, 6, 7. Those numbers will never equal 3. Will never not equal 3. Will always not equal 3. So they're never going to equal 3, which means they're never going to be false, which means you get that infinite loop. All right, how could we fix this so it's not an infinite loop? Well, there's a couple things, right? You can make this number bigger than 4, so it'll go up to, like if we said 10, it would go from 4 to 10. Or instead, you could maybe put minus minus here. And that way, instead of increasing the number, it would go down, and then eventually it would equal 3. So, you know, a couple different options depending on what you're actually wanting to get. All right, so here's a couple examples I want you to go ahead and look through. See if you can go ahead and figure it out. And then in the next couple of seconds after we put on pause, I'll go ahead and show you how I would attack each of these problems. The first one is you're going to write a while loop that will ask the user what is their favorite movie 5 times. And then you're going to add each movie to an array. And I want you to exit the loop when the array has exactly 5 movies. Then the next program, you could write a program that will ask the user how many countries that they have visited. Then write a loop that will ask them to list out the countries individually, stored in a file called foreigncountries.txt. Make sure the loop exits after the number of countries they said that they visited. All right. So for example, if they say they visited 2 countries, then only make it so that loop loops twice. All right. If they said they visited 10 countries, then go ahead and have that loop where it loops 10 different times. All right. Go ahead and pause it here, and then go ahead and try to write it out. If you get stuck, I'll go ahead and show you how I would attack this problem. All right, so we're going to go ahead and write a program that includes a loop that asks for a person's favorite 5 movies 5 times, stores it in the array, and then when the array has 5 items, exits the loop. All right, so again, this is a little bit more challenging. All right, but we can go ahead and attack it. So let's go ahead and first, I'm going to go ahead and write CLS because I always do that at the top. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my less than greater than sign, put my 2 pound signs, and then name, and date. Title, this is going to say favorite movies in an array, and we should be good to go. All right, so we need to, all right, create a while loop that loops 5 times and adds their favorite movie to an array, and then we want to escape the loop when the array has exactly 5 movies. All right. Okay, we got to think about what variables are we going to initialize first. All right, so again, we have a while loop. We know we're going to have a while loop in there, but we know we're going to have movies, and we know we're going to have an array. So I'm going to go ahead and make a movie array, and I'm going to set that equal to empty because I don't know, again, I don't know what is going to be put in that array because I'm going to be asking someone for their input, right? I'm going to be using user input. So I have that initialized. I'm going to go ahead and put in I know we're going to do a while loop, right? So I can go ahead and do my Control J, and I can do my while. All right. So this is, I'm initializing my movie array and then I'm going to have inside this while loop, right? And I want to create a while loop that loops 5 times. So in this case, how do I create a loop that loops 5 times? I don't care at this point in time. I don't care about anything else than saying, I know I need a loop that loops 5 times. I don't care about favorite movies. I don't care about asking questions. The only thing I care about is creating a while loop that will loop 5 times. So how do I do that? Well, one way to do it is by using a counter. All right. So counter is equal to 1. And then we can say while, remember what we just did, while, we're counting from 1 to 10. We can say while counter is less than or equal to 5. All right. Display my counter, and then counter plus plus. Right? So right now, counter is equal to 1. Counter is less than or equal to 5. Display counter, which would be 1, increase it to 2. 2 less than or equal to 5, that is true. Display 2, increase my counter. So if I go ahead and run this, I should get a loop that runs exactly 5 times. So let's go ahead and check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So I know this loop ran 5 times because every time it ran, it displayed counter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Now, I know that this loop runs 5 times. Now, I don't necessarily need to display my counter each time because now I know that it's running 5 times. Now I need to worry about the favorite movie, right? And then adding it to that array. But the first thing I want to do is like, okay, I can create this while loop. I need to make sure that it loops 5 times. Now, all right, and again, don't forget this part right here. This part is very, very important, right? So I want to make sure that I'm incrementing my counter by 1 every time it loops. All right. Now I have to worry about adding their favorite movie to the array. How do I ask, right? What is your favorite movie? How do I ask that? Again, that would be user input, which is read host. So now I can say, okay, let's save that as, favorite movie. And we're going to say read host. and say, please enter your favorite movie. All right. So now we have 5 times it's going to be asking, please enter your favorite movie, and it's going to store it as into the variable fav movie. All right. Now, so let's look at what are we supposed to do. Create a while loop, loops 5 times. Check. Adds their favorite movie to an array. Now, we need to make sure that we take that and we add that movie to an array. All right. So how do I add this to an array? Well, just so happens we have this array here, and adding something to an array is going to be using that append operator, that plus equals. So now we can just do movie array plus equals, and then fav movie. Now this is where a lot of people get confused with the order. Think you're adding this item to the array. So favorite movie is added to the array each time. So now movie array should be getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time it's adding that favorite movie to it. And then after the loop, we can go ahead and display the movie array. And once we display the movie array, it should actually have 5 items in it. All right, so let's go ahead and run this, and hopefully it works for us. All right, so first movie. All right. Cat, dog, Herbie Rides Again, Titanic, and Lord of the Rings. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Beautiful. All right, so we displayed the array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we are good to go. All right, so it is exactly what we wanted. We created that while loop. It executed 5 times. It added that favorite movie to the array, and then we escaped the loop when it had 5 movies, and then we displayed the movie array at the end. All right, so now I'm going to actually take our code and we're going to change it up a little bit, right? So this next code, instead of doing favorite movie, we're going to talk about list of countries that people have been to. So we're going to do, you know, a certain list of countries, and then we're going to put that in an array. So in this case, we're going to create a while loop. However, we don't know how many times it's going to loop. That loops an unknown amount of times, all right, depending on how many countries, all right, on how many countries the person has visited, all right, and then we want it to escape the loop when it loops the exact amount of countries visited. All right, and let's go ahead and keep it where we're putting into the array and all that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and instead of initializing a movie array, all right, I'm going to initialize a country array. So this is going to be the countries visited. So instead of movie array, we're going to say, okay, this is going to be a country array. We're still going to keep a counter at 1. Actually, no. Yeah. So we're going to still keep counter is equal to 1. All right. But then we're going to also have we're going to ask them, right? Because we have to ask them how many countries they visited. All right. So this is going to be number of countries visited. All right. And again, we're going to set this because anytime we're asking, right, that's going to be user input. So we're going to have to use the read host. And then we're going to ask them, how many countries have you visited? All right. Again, because this is a number, we want to make sure that we force this to be an integer. All right. Now, instead of counter is less than this number 5 right here, because we want to create a while loop that loops the number of countries visited, right? So instead of 5, we don't know. It could be 1, 0, 3, 5, whatever, right? So we would actually just put that right here, number of country visited. So while the counter is less than or equal to number of countries visited, and it will loop however many number that they put in. So if they put in 1, right, it's just going to loop once. Except actually we're going to have to be careful here. Nope, that should work. Okay. Because we're starting at 1 because we have that less than or equal to. Now, so that'll loop however many times, right, that they answer. Now, for the most part, we can keep everything else the same. So this question is we're going to say, okay, please enter a country. So we can just keep that at country. Please enter a country you have visited, right? And then we're going to add, remember that country, and then we're going to do country array. All right, so we add country to the array country, and then we increment counter, and then we'll check in there, and then eventually after we're done, I want to go ahead and display country array. All right, so let's go ahead and run it. I think we should be good to go. So let's do 3. So let's say we got USA, we got Mexico, and we got Canada. All right, there we go. It did exactly 3 times. Perfect. Let's run it again just to make sure. Let's do 1. Whoops. Let's try that again. 1. All right, let's try 1. All right, let's do, let's say Venezuela. And then, boom, shows Venezuela, and then we're done. Let's do one more, maybe a bigger one. Let's 8 countries. USA, Mexico, Honduras, Canada, Peru, Ecuador, what else? Senegal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and Bolivia. All right. And again, it did it 8 times, and we get 8 different results in our array. Again, if you didn't get it, so think of another way that you can do it. One of my favorite ways to do it, and actually see if you can get it, is instead of using a counter, do array.length. So inside here, do array.length. And then you can actually get rid of this variable counter. All right, I'll go ahead and leave you to that, and we'll keep on going to the next section. All right, so next section is on do while loops. Now again, once you get the concept of loops down, really these different loops are not that hard to understand. So as long as you get one of the loops down, the other loops are fairly similar, right? There's just a couple things that change. So a do while loop, again, is very similar to the while loop, but the biggest difference is it evaluates the conditional statement at the uh, end, right? So the do while loops, it does something first, right? It'll go ahead and do this code block, right, before it checks it. Whereas the while statement always checks at the beginning, that conditional statement. The do while will do it first, and then it checks that conditional statement at the end. So one important note, right, is all do while loops will execute the code at least one time before they check that conditional statement. Right? While loops may not execute the code at all if it's false at the very beginning. But do while loop doesn't check it first. It runs the code and then it'll check it. And then if it's false, it'll exit, but it will still have at least executed that code at least one time. So again, for each loop, the condition is checked after it runs through the code. Again, not before. So it'll do this code first, then, right, it's going to go ahead and check. So what I want you to do is go ahead and write a do while loop. Ask the user to enter a word that has at least 10 characters. Repeat the question until the user has entered a word with 10 or more letters. All right, I'll go ahead and let you work at that, and then I'll go ahead and show you how I would go about doing that. But go and put this on pause, see if you can do it, and I'll show you how I did it. All right, so let's go ahead and work on this do while loop. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and do CLS, and then I'm going to go ahead and do my comment block. I'm going to put my name, the date, and then title. So do while loop that asks for a word with at least 10 characters. All right, let's go ahead and attack this. All right, so let's kind of think about brainstorm. What do we want? So we know we're gonna have a do while loop. So I can go ahead and just do my Control J. I can type in do, and then go down to do while. I'm not sure what this is gonna be yet. So I have my do while. I'm gonna throw that in there. I know I'm gonna ask for a word, and I'm going to continue to ask for a word with at least 10 characters. So this is important to think about because a lot of times you don't know, okay, does it go inside the loop? Does it go outside the loop? And how do I know? So if you want to continue to ask if they get it wrong, if you want to continue to ask until they get something, until they have a word with at least 10 characters, if you're going to be doing it repeating, right? You're repeatedly ask them, then that means it needs to be inside the loop. Now, if you don't want it to be repeated, then you want it to be outside the loop, of course, right? So in this case, we're going to ask that question inside of that loop. So inside the loop, I'm going to ask that question. So I'm going to say, hey, enter a word. So I can just, define my variable as to be word. So word equals, I'm going to do my read host, please enter a word with at least 10 characters. All right. So now word, whatever they enter is going to be stored into word. Hopefully it has at least 10 characters. If it doesn't, we're going to want to go ahead and repeat it. So you have to think of, so while the word doesn't have 10 characters, repeat. Does that make sense? So while the word does not have, so while my word does not have 10 characters, so while it doesn't, I want it to repeat. So once it actually does, then I want it to exit. All right. So while word is less than or equal to 9, repeat. But when it actually has 10 characters, then I want it to escape because I'm done. Right? Now, a lot of you will get confused. You're like, okay, hey, I figured it out. But look at what you're actually saying here. We aren't asking for the word to be less than or equal to 9. Does that make sense? Because the word is going to be like fish or balloon or something like that, right? So that doesn't make sense to say, hey, is fish less than or equal to 9? That doesn't make any sense. This should be some sort of number, right? So I want to know how many characters, right, are in that word. So what operator could we use? Well, I know for arrays, we can use the dot length operator. That tells us how many items there are in that array. But the cool thing about strings, they can also use a dot length operator. And instead of telling it items in the array for strings, it's characters in the string. So actually, I can use the same operator as dot length. All right? So I can come on down here. I can say, please enter a word with 10 characters, stores it in a word. And this word dot length tells you actually how many, it'll give you a number of characters in that string. And then it'll continue to ask until it is. And then once you actually have one that's at least 10 characters, then it escapes. So again, as simple as that. So let's go ahead and run it and let's see what happens. All right, so again, let's do one with less than 10 characters. So if I do fish, great. So it asks me again. All right, so bear, nope. All right, so none of these are working, right? Until I do one that has at least 10 characters. So let's do one with at least 10 characters. So fish, and that's 7. Fishing is, see, I think that should be 10. And it escapes. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and run it one more time. Let's do something with greater than 10 just to make sure. So supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong. All right, but that should have at least 10 characters in it, so it should escape, and it does. Perfect. All right, so next we're going to go into do until loops. So again, do until are very similar to do while loops, except that a do until loop will exit the loop once the condition reads true. So I really actually like do until loops. They're probably one of my favorite loops out of all of them. The biggest thing is I always think of do until, right? Do this until I get what I want. And whenever I get what I want, exit the loop. So in other words, as long as the condition is false, it continues to do the loop. I'm saying do this until something. So if it's false, it will continue to loop. When it's true, that's when it exits. This is the only loop that exits the loop when it's true. Everything else, all the while loop, continues to loop while it's true. And it exits when it's false. This one exits when it's true, but will loop while it's false. Another thing about this loop, of course, any of your do loops, whether it's do until or it's do while, they will always execute the code once because it evaluates the conditional statement at the end, right? So if it's a do while, if it's a do until, it will always execute the code at least one time before exiting. But again, it checks it at the end. So if you look at the example there, we have do until our number is greater than or equal to 1 and number is less than or equal to 10. All right, so you do that until it's pretty much between 1 and 10. All right, so you're asking enter a number between 1 and 10, and then do that until you actually enter a number between 1 and 10. When you do that, then you can exit. All right, so the example here, or the problem that I want you to work on is I want you to write a do until loop, ask the user to enter only 3-letter words, then checks to see if the user actually entered a 3-letter word. If the word is 3 letters, I want you to add it to the array. And then I want you to repeat this until the array has 4 words in it. And again, those words, all of those words should be 3-letter words. And once it has an array that has 4 words in it that are all 3 letters, then I want you to exit the loop. So give it a shot. I'll go ahead and show you how I did it. But again, I want you to go ahead and pause this video. See if you can do it on your own, right? If you can't, then you can go ahead and watch it. But I really want you to focus and try to get it without seeing my help. All right, so let's go ahead and do our CLS and then do our comment block at the top. And then today's date. And then a little bit of description of the code. So this code is going to use a do until loop to ask for 3-letter words and store in an array until it has 4 words. And then it will exit. All right. So again, this is going to be a little bit tricky, right? Because we have to use a do until loop. We're going to be asking them several times, okay, enter a 3-letter word, enter a 3-letter word. And then we need to check. So anytime we check, we're going to have an if statement in there, right? Because we have to check to see if it's actually a 3-letter word. If it is, then we're going to add that to an array. All right. Now, here for me, I always have to ask myself, what is the overall goal? All right. What is the overall goal of this? Is the overall goal to get a 3-letter word, to get a word that has 3 letters, or is the overall goal to get 4 words? So you have to kind of think about, you know, smaller goals and then bigger goals. The bigger goal is going to be your overall kind of like outside loop, if that makes sense. So I really want to do this until what? Until I have 4 words, right? Not until I have 3 letters in the word. That's just a mini step, right? I want to get, 3-letter words, but ultimately it's until I have 4 words. So let's go ahead and attack. So again, we thought about our overall goal is to get it do this until I have 4 words. So let's Control J. Let's do our do until, and then we're going to do it until. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it into an array like it tells us. So I'm going to call it a word array until our word array has 4 words. Well, how do I figure out how many items an array has in it? I can do dot length, right? So until my word array dot length is equal to 4. So I do it until my word array dot length, or until the number of items in my array is equal to 4, right? So again, boom, that's not too bad. Again, that's the overall thing. Now, I do want to initialize my word array, right? I need to initialize that, right, as an empty array. So I want to make sure I do that at the beginning. All right. So now I have this word array, right? It's empty, but I'm going to run this loop until that word array has 4 items in it. All right, 4 words. So again, I'm going to be asking for 3-letter words. Anytime I'm asking, what does that mean? That means I need a read host, right? So I'm going to be asking for a word. So I can just go ahead and say word is equal to, and then I can do my read host, right? Please enter a 3-letter word. All right. So right now I'm asking enter a 3-letter word, and I'm going to do this until word length. Now I haven't done anything with word array yet. right? I need to ask for a word. They're going to give me a word. But then what do? Do I add it to the array first? Or do I need to check to see if it's a 3-letter word? Well, of course, I need to check, right? So anytime I have to check something, that means I'm going to use some sort of if statement to check, right? So word, please enter a 3-letter word, store that into Word. Now, after they do that, now I can check. So now I want to go ahead and do my if. So I'm going to do Control J. I'm going to have an if. Let's go ahead and do an if else just for fun. Now notice my do until covers everything in here. My if and my else, again, is going to be indented inside those. But I can tell exactly what my else is, exactly what my if is, and exactly what my do until is. So this is very important, again, that you keep everything nice, organized, indented so that you can read it easily. All right. So my if statement inside here, I'm checking what I want to check to see, hey, does this word actually have 3 letters in it? So how would I do that? Well, for strings, right, I can do word dot length. And I can say if the word dot length is equal to 3, that means there's 3 characters in that word. If there's 3 characters in it, what do I want to do? Well, I want to add it to my array. So to add it to my array, I say word array. To add it, right, I do plus equals and then word. So now, whoops, word is added into my word array, right? If that's not true, what does that mean? Well, that means it's not 3 letters, which means I should probably tell them, right? I can go ahead and write output. I can say, hey, you know, that word you entered was not 3 letters. And I can say try again. All right, so let's see what we got here. We're initializing our array to be an empty array, and then we're going to go into this loop. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, please enter a 3-letter word. And then we're going to store that into Word. And then if we're going to say if word.length, which tells us the number of characters, if the number of characters in that word is equal to 3, or in other words, a 3-letter word, we're going to take that word and we're going to store it into word array. We're going to add it to word array. And if we do that, then we're going to come down here. We're going to check, okay, word array.length. So again, be very careful. Notice we're using length operators for both of these. However, this is a string, so it tells it the number of characters in Word. Word array is an array, right? So it tells it the number of items in the array. And again, it should continue to do this until we get an array that has 4 items. Once it has 4 items, it escapes. So let's go ahead and run it and let's see if it works. So let's try a word that has 3 letters, cat. Perfect. Let's do dog. Yep, looks good. Let's do house. Now it should say that word, perfect. That word you entered was not 3 letters, right? And again, we should have to do this until we get 4, until we have 4 3-letter words. So right now we're at 2. Please enter a 3-letter word. Let's do it. Nope, wrong again. Ran and fun. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect, and it escaped. Awesome. If you're ever getting issues, all right, where it's not doing what you think it should be doing, let me recommend something. All right, so inside of your loop, but outside of your if else, what I would recommend is actually displaying what you're checking on. So I would go ahead and write out, okay, display what word is, all right? And then I would say display what word array is. And then I would also do, maybe like get type, right? But again, this a lot of times will be enough. So if I say, let's say write, and then I'm going to say word is, I'm going to have word, just so I know exactly what I'm doing. And then I'm going to say write word array is, and then display the word array. And again, this should kind of help see what's going on. And if you have mistakes, again, I would definitely recommend doing something like this to help you debug what your problem is. So let's go ahead and run it. Right, so please enter a 3-letter word. Let's say we do cat. Now it's going to tell us word is cat and word array is cat. So we added cat to this array, and then the word is cat. Now we're going to do another one. Let's say do dog. Right, so now word became dog because it overwrote, word variable with dog. And now we have word array is cat and dog. So again, we get two in there. Now let's do house. All right, the word enter was not 3 letters. Perfect. So word is house, but again, word array just has cat and dog in it. It didn't include house because that did not have 3 letters. All right, so if we do fun, perfect, word is fun, cat, dog, fun. Again, there's 3 of them. And then finally, the last one, let's say, is hat. And then word is hat, and then it has those 4, and then it escaped. And again, there are several different ways that you can attack this one, particularly with the do until loop. This isn't the only way. This is just one way that you can do it. So if you did another way, that's great. As long as that makes sense, then you're good to go. All right, next we're going to talk about input validation. So input validation just ensures the input from the user is what is expected, right? So for example, if I'm saying, hey, user, input a number between 1 and 100, right? Input validation is validating that the number they put in is between 1 and 100, right? So if they put in a negative number, of course, we don't want that. If they put in a number that's greater than 100, of course, we don't want that. So again, input validation is just validating that they entered is something that you actually expected them to enter. All right. So for example, if you're asking the user to enter either a 1 or a 2, you want to make sure that the user can only enter numbers of those 2, either 1 or 2. One way that you can perform input validation is you can do a do until loop. So this is a very simple one, right? So we're going to ask the user, please enter number 1 or 2. And we're going to repeat this loop until they enter 1 or 2. And if this is false, it'll ask them again and again and again until it's actually true. All right. So again, if they enter 3, let's go ahead and check it out. All right. So let's say, please enter number 1 or 2. They entered 3. Now number is equal to 3. Let's go and check it. Does 3 equal 1? Nope. Or does 3 equal 2? Nope. So that would be false. Because it's false and it's a do until, it loops again until they enter 1 or 2. Let's say they enter 1. 1 equal 1? Yes, that's true. Does 1 equal 2? No, that's false. But again, if we have an or with 1 true, it doesn't matter, right? It's still going to be true. And we do it until true, and then we escape. All right. So I want you to go ahead, write a do until loop that asks the user to enter a number between 1 and 10. And I want you to repeat that until the user actually enters numbers between 1 and 10. So if they enter 15, it needs to repeat. If they enter a negative number, it continues to repeat until they enter number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. All right, so a number between 1 and 10. All right, and I'll go ahead and show you how I would do it. But again, I want you to really work on, see if you can do it on your own. And then once you get it, then you can go ahead and see the way that I did it. All right, so let's go ahead and first of all, let's go and wipe that clean. And then we're going to go ahead and do CLS at the top. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and do some input validation. All right, so let's go ahead and do our name. date, and then description. All right, and this one we're going to go ahead and do input validation, asking user for a number between 1 and 10. All right, I know I have to use a do until. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control J, get my do until, erase that because I don't know what variable I'm going to be using. And then pretty much I'm going to be asking the user, right? So again, you have to think about what is inside, what is outside your loop, right? If I'm asking the user just once, it would be outside the loop, right? But am I asking the user over and over, or am I asking them one time? Well, it depends, right? I might ask them once, or I might ask them over and over, because if they keep on giving me numbers that are outside of that range, I have to ask them over and over. So in this case, we want it inside the loop because I'm going to be asking them again and again until they give me what I want. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use my read host, right? I'm going to go ahead and use the word number, read host. Please enter a number between 1 and 10. All right, and again, read host, if I'm storing it, right, as a number variable type, I need to actually make sure, right, and force it to be an integer. Otherwise, it'll be a string because it is read host. All right, now I'm going to ask them, enter a number between 1 and 10, and then store that into a number. Now I need to check, right? So did they actually do what I asked them to do? So is my number between 1 and 10? All right, is it? So really, I think this is pretty much it, right? So I'm going to ask the question, enter a number between 1 and 10. If it is, I'm going to check. If it is between 1 and 10, it escapes. If it's not, it's just going to ask that question again, over and over and over again. And that's pretty much it, right? So now I just have to figure out, what is this conditional statement going to look like? All right. So enter a number between 1 and 10 until my number is between 1 and 10. Until my number is between 1 and 10. Now, again, you can do this a lot of ways. You can say, is my number maybe in the array, and have an array of 1 to 10, right? The way I would do it, all right, is I would say it has to at least be 1, but it also has to be less than or equal to 10. All right, so it has to be greater than or equal to 1, right? Or number has to be less than or equal to 10, right? That looks like it should work. Why not? So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and run this sucker. All righty. So we run it. Please enter a number between 1 and 10. And so I'm hoping if I enter a number between 1 and 10, it should stop, right? So let's go ahead and do 5. Hey, looks like it's working well, right? So if I do 1, hey, it stopped. If I do 10, hey, it stopped. Perfect. I don't even need to test anymore, do I? Well, let's go ahead and test a negative number, right? So if I test at -4, I want it to ask again, right? Because -4 would be incorrect. All right, so let's go ahead and enter. Uh-oh. That's not what I was expecting. All right, so let's run it again. Let's do 12. All right, so for some reason, for some reason, my code is stopping every single time. It's escaping outside of that loop. All right, why is that? I want it to do it until it's between 1 and 10, but continue to ask if it's outside of that. All right, any guesses? It's actually right here, because you have to be really careful about your ors and your ands. So think about this. What number is greater than or equal to 1 or less than or equal to 10? Well, actually, that would be every single number, right? So pretty much what we're saying is, do this until you enter any number. And if you enter any number, it's going to escape. So what I want is not or, I want and, because both right? It has to be both. It has to be greater than 1 and it has to be less than 10 to be in between. If I say or, I'm just saying it's greater than 1 or, which is going to be any number that's positive, pretty much, or less than 10, which is going to be include, numbers 1 through 10, but it's also going to include all the negatives. So it's pretty much saying, hey, enter a number until it's either a positive or a negative number, which is pretty much everything, including 0, right? So you definitely want and, because and is going to say it has to both be bigger than 1 and it has to be less than 10 to be in between. So now if we run this, it's saying it has to be both between 1 and 10. So if I do 4, it should stop, which is good. But if I do outside that range, let's say 0, oh, ask me again, 11, nope. -4, nope. 15, nope. 9, now it escapes. So again, be very, very careful, right, with with your and, with your or, and all that. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't quite make sense, try to do some extra practice. Try to do something. Try to, erase this. Don't look at it, and then try it again. All right, so we're already halfway through loops. We've talked about while loops. We've talked about do while loops. Talked about do until, and also input validation. And now we're ready for the second most popular loop, the for loop. So usually the two most popular loops, you have your while loops, you have your for loops. For loops are very similar to a while loop, except they have just a little bit of a different makeup and syntax. So usually you would use a while loop for most cases where you don't know how many times you're going to be iterating through the loop. All right. So this could be something where you're asking like for user input, right? And you're trying to figure out how many times that they're going to be doing it, but you just don't know, right? So a while loop is great for that. Like, for example, if you're building an array, but you don't know if you're going to be adding something into the array each time, so you're checking that. So, you do it until it's 5. You're wanting to iterate about 5 times or something maybe, right? But every time it doesn't hit the thing that you're wanting to add to the array. So again, overall, the while loop is mainly when you don't know how many times you're going to iterate. Now, a for loop is used a lot of times when you know exactly how many times you're going to iterate or go through that loop, how many times you're going to repeat, right? So for example, if I know exactly how many times, like I'm going to iterate through this loop 5 times, or I'm going to iterate through this loop exactly 10, then I would 99.9% of the time, I'm going to use a for loop. So again, for loops usually is when you know how many times you're going to iterate. While loop, usually you don't. But again, you can work it either way. So if you really like while loops, you can do while loops for everything. If you really like for loops, you can do for loops for everything. It really doesn't matter. All right, so a for loop is going to be similar to a while loop, but everything is kind of switched around. So if you look at the key components for a for loop, first of all, you have the keyword, which is for, and then you have these 3 things inside of your parentheses. You initialize your variable, right? You have your conditional statement next, and then you have your variable modification. So normally in a while loop, you still have all these parts to it, right? But your variable initialization, where you initialize your variable, usually that's outside of the loop, right before the loop, right? Then you have your conditional statement, and then you have your incrementer, or your variable modification, usually is down here. So a for loop, it takes all of this, it takes your initializing your variable and your modification, and it throws it inside the parentheses. And then notice they're separated by semicolons. So you have 3 parts inside your parentheses: your variable initialization, your conditional statement, and then your variable modification. And then you have your code block, but your code block has a lot less in it because you don't have this part in here. All right, and again, very important to note, inside your for loop, separated by semicolons. I know a lot of you are going to get confused, put commas here, and that's going to screw up your screw up your loop. So just make sure semicolons in here. All right. So that is the syntax for for loops. Let's go ahead and jump on over and let's see if we can do a for loop to count to 10. All right. And again, notice, again, you should be seeing a trend whenever it's within those curly brackets, right? All of these flow controls, you know, your if else, your switch, for loops, once we get to functions, you're going to see your code statements that are within the curly brackets. Should make sense. All right, so let's go ahead and do a loop that counts to 10.